Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Dana Nielsen, and if you're not familiar with Dana, Dana is a Grammy-nominated mixer, engineer, producer, and he has worked with massive artists like Rihanna, Adele, The Smashing Pumpkins, Neil Young, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Weezer, Bob Dylan, Kanye West, and so many more. He has also worked very closely with Rick Rubin as his assistant as well. So in today's episode, we cover a lot of ground about what it's like to work behind the scenes with a producer like Rick Rubin. And, Dana shares so many great stories of working with him. And we also get into an interesting conversation about what it takes to run a session at that level. When you're working with artists that big, how do you ensure that these sessions go super smooth and that creativity is flowing and you're getting the best out of all of your performers? And Dana has a lot of great advice for what he recommends when it comes to that kind of stuff. We also get into chatting about vocals because Dana has recently released a new vocal production course. And so I wanted to pick his brain a little bit about the process of capturing pro-sounding vocals and not only how do you capture them, but after that, what do you have to do to get your vocals to sound like a pro-modern sound? What steps go into that? So in this episode, we cover all of that stuff, and Dana gives us lots of great stuff to consider. So with that said, let's just jump right into today's episode because I think you're going to really enjoy it. Dana Nielsen, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going, man?
Thanks, Mike. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's going great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, how you got into all the awesome stuff you're working on these days?
Yeah. I'm a producer, mixer, engineer. My background is as a musician, a saxophone player. Saxophone's my main instrument. I play some other stuff too, but not super well. But I grew up playing saxophone, went to college for that. Grew up outside of Chicago, about an hour west in a little town called Geneva. And went to college in New Orleans at Loyola University of New Orleans. Studied jazz, and I still play and on a fair amount of like sessions and different projects I'm writing on or producing or playing with or whatever. But I am mostly a producer, mixer, engineer guy. And that's what I've been doing. My wife and I moved to LA in 2000, right after college. She also went to Loyola and is also a freelance musician, vocal contractor, music therapist, and amazing session singer. So we've been two, West Coast freelance, Wild West gunslingers for about 23 years now.
Love it.
And it's always interesting. And so we both mostly... we do a lot of work from home, and we each have our own studio here at home. And we have an 11-year-old crazy woman as a daughter, and she's also very musical. And it's just the kind of amazing house of music over here. It's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. I love that. I have a 6-month-old, so haven't quite got to the point where she's into music yet, but I can already see like she's always staring at my drums and whenever she's in my room, and it just
oh my gosh, yeah.
I can't wait. I was looking at your Instagram page yesterday, and you have so much like awesome family stuff on there, and it's just I get excited by that, like looking forward to the future with that stuff. So
it is so fun, man. And if you I do put plenty of moments on there, especially, and we watch them a lot too, my wife and my daughter and I will go back and like see, there's so many hilarious moments of the first time, like me showing her how to use machine or, a drum machine or like getting her on the mic and she's like singing her heart out. And, you have a daughter, right?
Yeah.
Just being in that room that you're in right now, I know, listeners can't see it, but it's a studio and there's equipment and drums and like, I mean, that stuff is, is
Kids
so
love whatever
cool.
they can hit or make noise with, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Blinking lights, bright colors, stuff you can hit. Nothing really changes. We just, subdue our expressions.
Yeah, even as you get older, you still want to do all those things. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right on. So you talked about how you played sax, and then how did you ultimately get into the music production side of it? Because I'm sure sax is that'll keep you busy if you got the right kind of gigs.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, with a bit of hindsight, I think over the years it's become a little clearer how that path panned out. As someone who does love saxophone and playing music, I'm a child of the 80s when saxophone was on everything, and there were, it was just a much bigger. Of course, it's coming back a bit now, but
I was going to say it's coming back for sure.
Yeah. By the time I was in college and really deep into it, really, shedding hard and wanting to do that professionally and full time, like, do I move to New York? Am I gonna what's the next move? It had fallen a lot out of favor since the 80s. It was still obviously very popular in jazz and blues and R&B. And, I played in an amazing reggae band through college and did a lot of jazz, straight ahead jazz gigs and stuff like that. But pretty much it's like, unless you're pursuing at that time, unless you're really pursuing a jazz career, it's, you're kind of in that zone musically. You got jazz, you got blues, occasional other gigs you might spotlight on. And while I love those styles of music a ton, there's so much other music that I really, really love and have a passion for and feel inspired to be a part of. And when I was, a junior in college, I started taking the recording techniques class and the electronic music class. And those things had always been passions. Even in high school, I had my wife and I had we were high school sweethearts. And so we have a lot of history. But like our senior year of high school, her mom let us use her ThinkPad IBM laptop, and we got a copy of Cakewalk, and we were sequencing stuff on her MIDI, digital Yamaha piano for our talent shows and stuff like that. So I definitely always had been very interested in MIDI and, computers and making tracks really. And so then fast forward, many years later in these classes at school, it was like, it came full circle. Here's all this great equipment I've always had a passion for. And lo and behold, it let me become helpful to other people in the studio. The studio became not only a place where all of this amazing equipment lived, and this new area of study and microphones and all this stuff, these things that were very interesting to me, but it also was like grounds for all this other creative expression by other bands that I didn't need to be a part of to help out. Much like you were saying earlier, it's like being, I always say like engineering, producing, mixing, all this stuff is really a service industry, and being of service to other people's creative endeavors is like so fun, to be a part of that music that they're making, especially if you're hired or invited to partake in any type of decision making by way of producing, or just you're a handy engineer who they'll allow to make comments, if there's no producer present or something like that. Even just being a fly on the wall and hitting record and listening to their discussions and stuff. I just found it all so fascinating and enriching. And by my senior year, I'd been teacher assistant and was in the studio all hours of the night. Literally, like I would leave the studio and see my professors like arriving at work, and I'd have class with them in, a matter of minutes or hours. I just loved it. And so by the time I finished school, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to still play saxophone, still be a musician at heart and when applicable, but I really wanted to pursue the other side of the glass, as they say, producing and mixing, engineering, making music, writing, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I think a lot of people getting into this industry, like we're musicians, we love playing music, we love being around other musicians, and a lot of us have this like rock star goal or whatever, we want to be the stars or whatever. But I think that as you start to get into the studio side of things, you start to realize like just how much collaboration you can have in the studio. And then that makes it just as fun. You're still working on music. Yeah. You're still collaborating with people. You're having, same sort of conversations about writing songs and arranging stuff. And, you can still get just as much pleasure out of the process. It's just different scenario, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's really fun. And, I've been very, very lucky to work with people who are superstars, and being around them and their talent and their, energy and their experience and stuff like that. Not, not a rock star famous in my own right. It's like you say, it is thrilling to be around that, be a part of it, and I don't mean in a grabby, overt way. I mean, just in the smallest sense, a silent collaborator at times, just hitting record and making sure things don't go wrong and knowing what to do when they do go wrong. So I just don't want to give the impression that like I'm there to overstep bounds or getting someone's business where it's not welcome or not asked for. And I think that's a really also a gratifying part of the job in that service mindset is being helpful without being clobbering somebody over the head with your own ideas and stuff like that. I think that's a real extremely, possibly the most important part of this job, is having, there's a lot of people with skills who can, operate Pro Tools real fast or have great ears even. But it's a real important thing to be able to have the right energy in the studio and be gracious, be humble, be silent, be attentive, helpful, serving. And that's tricky. That's tricky for all of us. But I think for many people, and especially when you're young, it's real easy to just get excited and start talking too much.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I remember, all the bigger engineers that I talked to when I was growing up, and I'd ask them about internships and they'd be like, your job is just to like stay quiet in the corner, just listen. Yeah. Like no one's really expecting you to talk and lead a session. We don't want that. Yeah. There's other people in the room that are doing that. Which is interesting. So I'm curious to know, now that we've brought up this topic, like, having worked with so many big artists and different big producers throughout your career, I'm curious to know, like, generally, like how much flexibility do you typically find yourself having as far as being able to contribute your input, versus having an artist or producer kind of dictate what they want? Because I imagine, it seems like you're getting hired a lot of the times as the engineer and not necessarily the producer. So you're helping carry out someone else's vision, right? So so how does that balance work for you as far as getting your input in, or being able to provide, your service? Yeah.
It's a good question, and an important distinction, and it varies every project. I definitely do a lot of producing, less so at this point for the major artists. Like all my like big credits, are as a mixer, as an engineer, and a lot of them working with Rick Rubin. I've worked with him for many, many years, and he's amazing, first and foremost. I love him and I've learned so much from him. He really gives, there's plenty, let's see, how do I put this? Like as an engineer, I find that I often make, at first when a session starts, like they're going to be talking. They've already discussed a lot that I'm not privy to about what the project is maybe shooting for or going to sound like. I might have some preliminary, of course, discussions before the session that might be a recap of those things. But along the way, especially if it's an ongoing session that's going to be weeks or months, or something like that, there tends to come a part there where, I get to know these people and start to develop a bit of my own rapport. If they're younger, maybe younger than me or same age or within that range, it's oftentimes, easier to, or seems more appropriate to flow into a bit of post-session chit chat. If they're an older, iconic type of artist, there's probably less of that, and I'm definitely always feeling those, what feels appropriate. But typically in any long session, you kind of get to know each other fairly well. And, in the case of working with Rick, we've been working together a long time. And there are plenty of times where, I'm working on overdubs or something like that and talking directly with the artist. I'm not trying to steer anybody to do anything other than what the direct vision of the artist and Rick is. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a lot of fun, and I don't feel ever stifled. I think when you're the runner or something, you're gonna talk to or if you're I don't remember the exact rungs of the ladder, but you're always gonna talk to the next person up. I remember when I was assisting Andrew Sheps or Greg Fiddleman or Brian Hewitt or Dave Schiffman or I wouldn't be talking to Rick or the producer or whatever. But you kind of have their ear, maybe there's something that you're curious about in the right time. And you ask the engineer you're assisting, what went on there? Or I think this might be happening or it flows, and then they can kind of take that stuff and, I'm kind of meandering here.
No, but I get it. You're kind of identifying that, that production hierarchy or something like that, so that what your place is amongst the session, right?
Yeah, and I think I put to glom onto that and expand. I think what I'm trying to say is I've been fortunate to have amazing leeway with the artists that I've gotten to work with for the most part. We have a great time in the studio. We all develop a rapport. Rick is a very amazing, generous, open ears, open heart for cool ideas that the artist wants to try. And, it's a lot of fun as opposed to a situation where I'm working with the producer and I'm hired as the engineer and, Dana, be quiet in the corner. Don't talk, we always have a great time. So
that's great.
Regardless the role that I'm there to do, while I'm very aware of the role and respectful of everyone around me and their roles, there's always a lot of good times and a collaborative spirit and a willingness to hear cool ideas and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I was curious about that with working with Rick specifically because, he's kind of famously said that he knows nothing about engineering. And so, and I'm sure he knows much more than he gives himself credit for. But when it comes to being his engineer and carrying out his vision, if he doesn't have that technical minded approach, then I'm assuming a lot of it would rest on your shoulders to kind of, get that sound that's in his head to come out of the speakers. So,
yeah.
As far as achieving that, is it just a matter of having open lines of communication and kind of meeting with him ahead of time or the artist ahead of time and really getting clear on that kind of stuff and then go into your own expertise of, okay, you would use this mic on this or that kind of thing?
Yeah, totally. And I would say that those ahead of time conversations could be very brief. And a lot of that stuff might be expanded upon as we get into it. But Yeah, very, very little usually going into it. Like I'm not being, told what gear to use ever. There would likely be some direction, or I would certainly ask, depending on what the artist is and like, well, who's coming, who's going to be playing at that point. If the producer doesn't know, then I'd be reaching out to the band, the artist management, or maybe they're coming off tour. A lot of times, we're catching a session while an artist is on the road. Okay, who of the band will be here to record? Do they want to play their own instruments? All the regular stuff. Like, what do we need to have ready? But then, in the area that I might discuss ahead of time with Rick or another producer, like, do you have any vision for like how you want this to go? Here's what I'm thinking. Like, do we want the vocals isolated or everybody in the room? He might have some ideas about that. And I think it'd be important to get them together, in the room for this, and we're always with the caveat, like whether it's set up front or not, that we're going to have lines everywhere. Like, so when inevitably the case becomes like, oh, we need to get, we're super inspired. You got to get in the booth. There's no time to be like, oh, but we only ran lines on the floor and we don't like, you have so many, that's part of working, especially I think with him, because there is little info up front. And there's room, like anything could happen, and it's all, that's not to say that anything is disorganized. That's intentional for the artist and him to feel free to experiment and flip the whole setup on its head, move around, try something out in the living room. Like, oh, what if we do, this? So many things you just prepare for. And I think that has really served me well in all the work that I do with anybody before a session, just being ready for anything within reason, but you can kind of like, you get better and better at like seeing potential roadblocks or potential inspiration. I'm always trying to think like, oh, what if they want to do this? Well, here's what we'll do. We're going to move that mic out there. We're going to have a stand or 5 stands already set up around these areas. We're going to have the lines run, and then everything's on quick clips. Okay. So if we need to, like, that's the vocal mic that we've, decided, like, we're not going to switch to a different mic, but we can take this off, whatever you got to do. And me and the assistants will rehearse that stuff too, before the session, or maybe it's an overnight move that we realize we could be more efficient at something. And, I don't know. It's like I wasn't a Boy Scout, but it's some kind of Boy Scout stuff, I guess.
I love that. That's so cool. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's like you've, in like business, you're always trying to like create a positive customer experience and all that. Right. And it's like, yeah, obviously we have clients, we have people coming into the studio. It's like, we got to create that environment that just allows people to get that best experience. And I love the fact that you've like, even thought about like the quick clips and stuff like that, like optimizing just to make sure that like things run as fast as they can and they're just as smooth as they can. There's no hiccups and,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I imagine it's like I imagine at that level, it's a pretty well-oiled machine as far as like, making sure the sessions run real smooth.
It really has to be. And, I'll tell you another thing that I just love working with him, with Rick, is like in those times when things don't work out or something breaks or the artist decides they want to do work somewhere in a different part of the studio, or there's some curveball that comes your way. I've definitely worked with other producers and artists and stuff where that is just, means for explosive anger or, super frustration and Rick really is like incredibly calming and reassuring. Of course he'll be looking at me like, let me know as soon as this worked out, like, absolutely, we are on it, but it's always very, calm, and he trusts that we'll figure this stuff out. Where in other, situations, it's if I'm in recording for somebody else, or, I'll see some serious, what's going on? This is crazy. Get this, like there's none of that, and I always, thankfully those sessions are very rare, but whenever I'm in those situations, I'm always like, man, it does not have to be like this at all, and I've done it so many times, with a crew that is calm and efficient and smooth, and so it's nice. I'm just trying to give props, really, and things that I've learned from that there as other friends of mine say, there is no such thing as a music emergency. It's like, we're going to get through this, and we're working very hard to accommodate.
Of course. Well, I think that's just part of the product of like being in the room with a lot of the people like these, like a lot of people like Rick or other engineers. It's like you kind of learn just from observing how people run their sessions, and what works and what doesn't, and then through that you kind of take your own approach to it, and you figure out how to make it as efficient as possible. And it's something that I often think about, because I often wonder with like the home studio market, and a lot of people don't have the ability to do that, where they're like shadowing other engineers and seeing sessions. So they're often in their own bubble, and they, that's just what the studio experience is like, because they've never seen anything else. So, there's always it kind of sucks that like all these big studios are closing down, because it makes it harder for people to get that experience. But, thankfully, I think there's a lot of great resources out there that are at least providing some insight into like, oh, it can be different.
You're right, though. It really, there's nothing like, that personal shadowing, assisting, whether you're, interning or assisting or whatever. To your point, like I've always had a home studio, even at like college, all through college, and even first moving out to LA in 2000, like how do you get a job as an engineer, or mixer, or certainly not on any like scale or big hip records, but like anybody, I'm always like, you just have to be doing it. If you love it enough, you're going to need to have your own equipment, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It could be just a laptop and GarageBand or whatever. But to be doing it, I would run monthly ads in Music Connection for years. In the back, in the early 2000s. For our production company, for a home studio, and I'd constantly have independent artists coming through who I'd produce and mix and co-write and all kinds of stuff, and that really kept my skills sharp. I'm constantly learning and constantly taking courses, and so then when I did get opportunities. Those opportunities can be really fleeting, and you have to be ready. Basically, like pretty much every break that I've had has been kind of an opportunity seen and seized. You know what I mean? Like being in the room when like overhearing somebody isn't available for something, and really being like, can I please do that? Like I know how to do that thing, like give me a chance, and in the most polite and respectful way possible, but basically just keeping your chops up. And, for me, easily it was like tuning vocals, or editing, drum editing or comping. And these are a lot of things that I talk about in the course that I've got at the moment, where like, and I mentioned in there at some point, I'm like, these skills were literally the gateway for me into bigger and bigger gigs, because I was doing this stuff all the time on an independent home studio level with my own clients. And then some bigger, one-off production things like, Dana, can you comp these vocals, or can you tune this, or can you edit? I just got better and better at editing. And again, tying back to the musicianship is key. It's really served me very, very well as a producer, mixer, engineer, technical guy with that musicianship background, because it's in everything. It's in every comping that I do. It's in every comp and every tuning and every everything. It's really a beautiful extension of that interest in music and history as a musician and performer. But I mentioned in there that in that course that that's the stuff where I had those tools sharp. And so when I would be assisting and overhear that somebody isn't available for a vocal tuning gig or something like that, would you please consider me for that? I can definitely do that for you, or somebody's out and can't do rough mixes. I can totally, I'm trying, there's so many things there that's the way that I've been able to be available and ready for fleeting moments that are golden opportunities.
That makes sense. And I think that's the story that I hear time and time again on the podcast. It's people who have harnessed, who've worked on their craft, worked on their skills, and they're ready for those opportunities when they come their way. And I love that you mentioned that. And things like editing, I think, that's such a powerful part of the process that, a lot of people just, they find it boring, so they don't really want to learn about it, or they don't want to do it, and also there's all these people that still think just a great recording is all you need. You don't need to edit stuff. You just capture it perfect at the source. And, there's some truth to that, but there's also, the modern music industry is a lot different these days, and you have to go deeper. And so I'd love to you talked about your course, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit. So you put out a vocal production course recently, and I have a loaded question for you, which is that what is the secret to pro vocals other than just putting up a microphone and getting a singer to singing key?
Yeah.
What steps are necessary to make a vocal sound at that pro level?
Well, it's very much, it starts with exactly what you said and ties into, we don't need editing. We just need a good performance. And that's the start, and there are plenty of recordings where that's the end as well. It's just a recording unedited of an amazing performance. I like to think that, at a certain level, working with a certain caliber of player, whether they're famous or not, each of those individual takes is one of those performances, is, releasable, they're really good. And that's what this course is about, not making something that's not good. It's really the harder stuff to me. Of course, making somebody who doesn't sound good is hard, and it's a lot of work. But a much better problem to solve is how to pick the best parts of somebody who's amazing, and how to split those hairs. How do you decide? And you can really, so it starts with a great performance, put a mic up and all that. And that's really where this course begins, because I don't, in this one, don't cover the recording part of it. I had a friend of mine, Josh Dell, do sing and play guitar simultaneously. He had asked should I separate the guitar? Should I play to a click and all that stuff? And I was like, no. Do I want the worst case scenario to not the right turn of phrase, but for an editor, what would be the most complicated thing when you got vocal bleed and there's tempo fluctuations between the takes and stuff like that? Very real world. I mean, this is how I like to work, and very much, learned from working with Rick too, is I never want to stifle the artist or have them perform in a way that isn't natural to them. And usually that starts with like, well, how did you write the song? You know, or how do you perform it? You know, okay, well, that's great. Like, why? I don't want to mess with that. And so that's when you start, you know, relying, of course, on a bit of engineering know-how, maybe where to place mics to avoid like phase issues and polar patterns to choose, or positioning in a room, or all that stuff. And so I did a little bit of preliminary. I had Josh send me one take and record it like on his phone video, so I could kind of take a look at where the mics are and stuff. And then I followed up and made a little video of my own to him, suggesting a different mic placement, and that'll, you know, offer a little better rejection and stuff. And that stuff is included in the course as well, and the sort of bonus material stuff. But then just give me 6 takes of you singing and playing. And then it's really the long form process of every step of the way, tedious as it is, of going through, organizing everything, listening section by section for the gold, you know, like listening for those like magical moments that really sound like a record. And then when you get into some of that editing, and certainly if you get into any tuning and there's vocal bleed, that becomes a very tricky editing game. There's a lot of ways to handle it, and that's kind of what you see in that section of the course, as well as like, you know, the crazy tricks and tools that are different every time, you know, like it's really a lot of problem solving and creative thinking in editing, and by extension producing, you know, is figuring out how to solve issues. You know, the artist is gone. These takes are what we have. I have a vision for this type of sound, and this one take in this chorus is like the most magical, most passionate thing. The hairs are standing up in my arms, but there's just this one little moment that is a little bit, you know, flat or sharp or something. And I can live with it if we have to, but let me see if I can just touch something up in what I know the artist was intending. You know, I'm never trying to like change what they're doing. And I'm certainly never, I call it like leave no trace. Like I don't want you to hear it and think that it's been worked on, you know? And so you start tuning that little thing, and then the untuned bleed is in the guitar, and like, what do you do? And so you have to kind of like, you know, hunt around for patches or fixes. And, you know, I also had, you know, this may have come in handy once, for that very reason. And this is something that we're prone to do in the studio with an artist who's playing and singing at the same time. After we've got, it's great if it's after it's been comped, but if I know that I'm not going to be with the artist anymore once the recording is done, and I'm going to be comping it like after they go back home or whatever, I'll have them play. I'll record both mics and everything, but just play through instrumentally, and that'll give me like all the parts, at least on the guitar, you know, that I can use for little patches here and there if necessary. If it's already comped, and this happens sometimes too, when, you know, like working with an artist that's playing and singing. I love this story about the Avett Brothers. I remember meeting up with them in North Carolina, and we're at Mitch Easter's studio for some overdubs, and their manager Dolph, who's amazing, he had said, he was explaining to me and the guys, like this opportunity for a sync came in, and it's this song, and they need an instrumental, you know, very common for sync licensing and stuff like that. And I said, well, we don't have that. And because that song is just vocals and acoustic guitars, and it was recorded, you know, all at once, you know, so there's bleed. If we just mute the vocals, you'll hear them in the guitar, you know, and they're like, oh, okay. All right. I said, you know, what we could do for this, and have done in the past, is like, I'll play you into your headphones. We'll set you guys up the same way as I remember we did this back at Shangri-La, and like you just play guitar along with the master take. I think the song had already been out. And you play along with it on guitar so that it's going to match the tempo and the pauses and the inflections and all that stuff. And we'll basically have like a skeleton take based on the performance that people are used to and that this, film wants to use, or I don't remember what film or TV show or something like that. And would definitely have done that in the past, to create an instrumental out of something that has no instrumental.
Love that.
But they heard that process, and I love them to pieces for so many reasons, but this among them, where like that to them, they immediately said, oh, no, we're not going to forget it, and it wasn't like, it was like, we don't want to mess with that song to get this sync deal or whatever, it was didn't even think about it for a second. It was like too precious to them the way it is. Recreating it in that way would be inauthentic, whatever the case may be. And I'll never forget, I was just like, you guys are freaking awesome. Much as I love a good sync opportunity, my goodness, I just thought that was so cool. But yeah, things like that, like grabbing, using an existing performance as a sort of template when there was no click to grab pieces that become very useful or might become useful during, post-production editing type of stuff.
For sure. Yeah, you got to get creative with it sometimes.
Yeah.
What are some of the most common editing tools that you rely on for getting your vocals to sound nice and clear?
Editing tools for vocal clarity. Probably more mixing things. The tools in editing, I guess. I'm a huge Melodyne fan, which isn't going to add to any clarity, but certainly a big part of my vocal production process, whether it's for tuning or timing. I also end up doing a lot of like, volume stuff in there by way of the amplitude tool. I don't go crazy with it, but it's kind of like clip gain before clip gain, and you can see it, and you're already in there kind of massaging things. Certain syllables really pop out, especially if I'm getting vocals that I didn't record and they maybe are dynamic and weren't recorded with any compressors or anything like that. Then there's lots of little syllables and words that pop out, or maybe somebody didn't record with compression and has already made a comp, and there's, takes coming in like, oh, this one's way louder than the other. Anyway, so I find it's a really great tool to work a lot of that stuff out, even as a bit of pre-mixing, the timing, the tuning, the volumes, sibilance. Definitely will. I don't use the sibilance tool within Melodyne. I think it's really cool that they've got that, but I haven't had the best results with it. So I still just cut those S's manually and use the amplitude tool to just turn them down. Yeah, and then in mixing, the keeping stuff clear. I would say the clarity question is more on the recording front end and then the mix processing, as well as EQ. And I mean, not just like additive EQ and stuff like that, but I think a lot of clarity, it's easy to think of like top end for clarity. And of course that is a great thing. But I spend a lot of time getting rid of or lessening muddy frequencies or things that are building up, especially in like a guitar and a vocal or something like that. Might have a lot of build up in the mids and low mids and things like that, depending on how it was mic'd and stuff. So I find a lot of that, and I will use different tools. I tend to use different tools to make those types of cuts and sort of subtractive surgical style EQ. And then I might add the more fun, sparkly stuff with something a bit more broad and colorful or something like that.
For sure. You'd mentioned Melodyne. Can Do you have a preference of using Melodyne versus a tool like Autotune? And if so, why?
Yeah, I use them both. And certainly for different purposes. And I'd say my answer to that will pay no regard to the fact that, of course, Autotune has a graphic interface where you can do similar type of work. And that's where I started. Like before Melodyne was even out, I was doing graphic mode Autotune for different producers and songwriters and stuff like that. And then when Melodyne came along, it was just a whole other level for me. So I use Autotune all the time, especially for a quick fix. And for certain styles of music where it's the sound. I wouldn't add Autotune as a mixer to somebody because I would go in and potentially tune something that needed it with Melodyne. I'd probably talk to them about it first or something, but I definitely use Autotune for that Autotune sound on something that I'm writing or performing. Sometimes I'll never forget, like working on the Rihanna Loud album. I was working with these amazing producers from Atlanta, Mel and Moose. And each day it was like this writer camp, and each day there'd be a different top liner coming through. And we were parked at, one studio for a week, and different people would come through each day. And that in that world, like people were tracking through Autotune. That was the first time I'd ever seen that. And I was just like, what? This is so wrong.
I've always thought that seems like such a risky thing.
Yes, that's what I thought. And man, I learned so much on that session. I was engineering all these different songs. Funny story, when I was asked by the studio manager, I'd worked at the past studios a ton on various records, Chili Peppers and Slayer, and like long stints there. And so I knew them well. And the studio manager called and was like, would you have any, I thought of you for this writer camp that's coming in. And it's just for like a couple of days. And would you be into that? And I was kind of like, a camp, like for kids? It's kind of like a, I guess, and this is my internal dialogue, not to her, And I thought like, well, I'm very passionate about songwriting and that craft. And I read books about it and study it and like, always trying to be better at it. And so I just thought like, yeah, heck yeah, I'll do this. Especially if somebody's going to be like teaching kids songwriting. These sound like fundamental skills that I would love to get better at, Little did I know, this is like the beginning of like the writer camp saga stage of, state of affairs. And it was massive. And Mel and Moose had written this song, this track. It became the song Raining Men. Rock City, two brothers did the top line, and it got picked right away. And so we were just in the mix for a long time, making tracks. And but those guys, even the top liners, I think at one point, one of them was really super fast at Pro Tools and was like, Dana, here's how you do this. And at the time I thought it was like so wrong, coming from this more, I don't know, like recording world. It just, you'll know what I mean. I think, where, you record it, you set up a mic in front of a vocalist and you do a full pass, and we're going to playlist everything, and we're going to meticulously go through and comp it. And honestly, like that is the way that I would work with most artists making an album. But if you're moving fast, if you're writing, certainly I use this flow ever since then, like for myself too, getting out vocal ideas and stuff like that, like tracking through it and then building the comp on the fly, with it's so funny talking about this. This is exactly, I've got like track presets that I've made that are exactly like this, recording through Autotune onto a slew of tracks below. They've all got, some panning. I've got background tracks. And this is the way that I was taught on this writers camp session that I've used ever since, on a certain style of fast paced, writing. especially where auto-tune, that sound is helpful and cool. And of course, you can always bypass the plugin. So if I don't want it, I just hit bypass. But
so do you mean that you'll have like is it like you have like one main recording track and then below that you'll have like kind of like lead vocal, double vocal, like pan harmony left right, and then you just kind of like record on the one track and you're just dragging down to like whatever. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I've done that a handful of times, and it's always a lot of fun because it definitely makes you work fast. But
it does.
You have to be like mixing mindset at that point when you're recording to like know where things are going to go and how they're all going to fit.
Yep. And two things about that is like I'm always in mixing mindset, always. And I think that's reinforced working with Rick as well. Is like he and by extension me, like you always want to hear everything finished, even on the go down, like it should sound like a record, like right away. The artist is doing their part and they probably already sound like a record anyway. So why would I, process things later per se, like, so, or wait, I never have a, this will sound better later mentality, like I'm getting everything raw and then you'll see just later, just hang in there. It's going to sound great. Like, I'm doing all that right away. And that doesn't mean I won't like improve upon it later if I hear it, but I'm never leaving room for improvement. Like I'm always trying to, and I'm always printing roughs, even in this, like, podcast recording. I've got my vocal mic coming in. I've got you separately and I'm printing a mix. Like there's always a mix being printed on the go down because so much can get lost. You come back to it even the next day, if not a week or month later, and you're in a different studio maybe or whatever. Even though the Pro Tools faders are the same as they were, it's like, what? Something, it's not, it doesn't sound the same, You go back to that, tracking rough as we call it, and it's like, oh damn, yeah, that's right. We had the plate on the console and then there was this other thing that was going, and listen to how much louder the vocal is then. Like that's because this plugin isn't on this computer and it's much, like whatever the case may be, having a 2-track of what it was is really an important reference. And for some artists, like Neil Young or Bob Dylan, like those guys are gunslingers, man. Like they'll have that tracking rough and be like, that's the shit. Like that's it, So, case in point, it's like, I'm always, I'm never saving any gas for later, I'm always trying to get it amazing on the go down. And, tracking through auto-tune in that type of scenario is an extension of that. You're getting the tuning you want, baked in and I think, for the right process, that's really amazing because you could play the same piece of audio, same vocal through live, sort of a real-time instance of auto-tune and get different results every time, So having it baked in and working with artists who want that. I mean, I'm talking about recording artists and top liners who know the tune speed. Like, put me on, 30. Like they're accustomed to tracking through auto-tune. So this isn't me. Yeah, you're not recording
Neil Young through that.
No. And so that's a great way to bake it in. You're getting their vocal performance, but you're getting their performance through auto-tune, and you're getting auto-tune to react to their performance in the exact way that you want it to, because they performed it and it went through it live and it was captured and it's never going to change again, And that's super helpful, especially when you start stacking things, because it's baked in and you'll hear those discrepancies. And it's not a type of thing where, like, if I was doing it all real time, I'd be like, oh, auto-tune didn't catch it that time, but I just played it back now and it seems okay or whatever. So it's baked in. But I guess going back to your original question, when I would use auto-tune and when Melodyne, auto-tune for that quick move, tracking in that quick way. And then Melodyne for the more, what I call for that chorus, the more natural vocal production, where the leave no trace vibe where
For sure.
I don't want anyone to know that it's been worked on.
Absolutely.
I can really get in there and do pretty incredible touch-ups without making it known to the listener. And honestly, like when I'm doing that style of tuning, I'm never going for perfection, like in a tuning sense. There's nothing I like loathe more than, and I hear it so much on like movies and shows where there's music and stuff like that. I'm always like, who is tuning this stuff? Like, it's so like, obviously I have like a critical ear, as I'm sure you do, or any listener to a podcast such as yours is like, knows what I'm talking about. Like probably most people listening don't know what we're talking about, but man, it doesn't have to sound like that. Like, I know maybe this actor isn't a professional singer, but I can tell they can carry a tune and yet they sound like a robot. You know, nobody holds a note like that crazy, you know, like give them a little breath, you know? So even if I tune something around, like I don't want it to be too perfect because again, that will set off alarm bells, at least in my ears, that like, this has been tampered with, you know?
Yeah.
So I like to make sure that it's not too clamped down in that way.
Of course. So it's interesting then, because with the idea of recording through autotune, like autotune is one of those tools that, you know, it is a little unpredictable. And like you said, you can record through it multiple times. It's going to react differently every single time. So with that randomness of autotune, I'm sure that you hear moments where you're like, that's not the note I would have gone for, or like, you know, it's correcting something that maybe it wasn't supposed to be, right? So as far as tracking through that, like, how are you just like, you know what, that's the sound, you know, it's supposed to kind of sound like that, or are you still looking for the kind of perfect note and just hoping that autotune does the right thing?
Do you mean like when it squarbles and goes funny for a minute and that's part of the sound?
Yeah, sometimes it'll kind of like think it's a certain note and it'll try to correct it, right? So you get those kind of like autotune.
Yeah,
sounds,
I think the technical
right?
term is squarble. No, I don't know that. I'm just making that up.
I was going to say, you told me.
I think it really depends on the artist or producer. Anyone who, like, I definitely don't go looking for that. I think it just depends. There's times, you know, if you're making like a T-Pain style track and you want like the super hard thing, then you'll set it really aggressively and you'll get plenty of those squarbles. And then it just becomes a matter of picking the right ones. It's another creative choice. And on the go down, that's part of the fun of committing it, is you get to pick the best squarbles, you know? And there are definitely, because it's endless possibilities. The way that someone is singing into autotune and their own performance each time is going to make it react a little differently. And whether you're going for squarbles or not, for damn sure, there'll be favorites, you know, and it's great to capture them live. Kind of like, you know, when I have a section in a mix where I want to do like some tape echo, feedback, loopy type of stuff. I'm never like, I might automate it in the plugin for a little bit, you know, to get a sense of what's going on, assuming I'm using a plugin, you know, but eventually, because, and I guess this is a little side note, like, man, I wish you could save automation playlists, you know, different passes of automation on things. But because you can't, I'm always like printing that stuff through onto an audio track because it becomes a performance, much like the auto-tune vibe. And if you don't capture it, like, it's never going to be the same again. Even if you like have it all on lock and automation in the plugin or whatever. So with that in mind, I think, you know, hunting for squarbles is the same type of vibe. You know, you're sometimes you just get the magic ones, and you got to make sure you captured them, because it probably won't happen again like that. You know,
absolutely, I love it. We I think we've definitely coined the term We squarble, like they got to start using it now.
Auto-tune squarbles. Yeah. Yeah.
There's going to be a squarble knob in the plugin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm always fascinated by the people who do the real-time auto-tune thing, because it's just like, it's always just felt scary to me. So I've never really messed with it too much. But it makes sense. Like if sometimes that's the sound you're going for, you don't mind having that auto-tune affected sound, then why not record with it, right? And I guess obviously it depends on the styles of music that you're working on, and you're not going to do it with a Neil Young or a Bob Dylan, that kind of thing. But
although they would be prone to try it. They're both. I mean, they're both very adventurous in their own ways.
Love that.
Yeah. But I had something I was going to share too about the I lost
That's all good. It'll come back to you. It's all good.
Yeah.
I'd love to shift gears just briefly to talk a little bit about your mixing process as well, because I know you do a lot of mixing too. And one of the things on your website, you had a great resource that outlined 5 mix power tips, and the first one that was on there I thought was really cool to read, and I think it's a very important thing for people to grasp the concept of, which is that you recommend that people start their mixes by finding the drama in a song. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that and what you mean by that and why that's so important to start there.
Yeah. Thanks. It's funny. Like I made that a while ago and I wasn't even remembering as you were teeing this up, like what was the first one? And find the drama. Yeah. These are all, that whole mix power tips is all kind of like philosophical stuff that could be applied to pretty much anything. And things that I use on every mix. Literally, finding the drama is so important. I was just doing it yesterday. Every time I mix, what it means is when I first have a session come in and I've got the routing done and I've got my sort of prep all sorted and I'm ready to like dive into this thing. Especially when it's a song with a high dynamic range, meaning there's like soft parts and big parts. The song I was mixing last night was amazing jazz ensemble with an orchestra and choir and soloists. And so this is stuff that definitely has a dynamic range. And it starts out with just 2 instruments, vocal and bass. And by the end of it, it's full, massive, drums cranking, orchestra cranking, choir, big time. And so especially with stuff like that, and I'll do the find the drama even with a more or less static dynamic track because it just helps, is I'll go right to that drama point. So for this song I was mixing last night, I don't even listen to the beginning yet. I go to the big part, the ending, the big finale, and I'll keep that on loop for a while and almost like finish the mix. I'm not going to get into automation at all, but I'll get a static balance and tones, working with EQs and compression to make everything in that drama moment work together. Often it has a lot to do with low end and depth perception and like getting that whole, if this is going to be the drama and this is the extent, this is the edges of your palette, everything else it will be sorted out behind it. And so whether the drama is at the very end of the song, like it was in this case, or maybe it's several places throughout the song in the choruses or whatever, I tend to start there and get all the tonal stuff worked out because that's where it's going to be the most difficult to get everything working together. Mm-hmm. And then I'll drop markers on the sections before and I'll go one marker back and okay, like now I got to just make sure that this section flows into this section, and then I'll get that going. And there I might start working on automation because there's going to need to be, things need to sound different when it's going like small to big, whether it's levels or again, that sort of depth perception that I'm talking about. If you have everything sort of like high passed and thinned out for this magnificent ending to give all the, bass and low end to the drums and bass or whatever. But then you have this like, as was the case in the song I'm talking about, an a cappella choir moment before that. I can't have the choir all high passed and thinned out for this, giant ending with the full band. It's got to sound like full, So there are definitely times where the lengths you go tonally to fit the drama onto that canvas, so to speak, requires some more aggressive tonal shaping to give that depth and width and perception of the drama. And then when you back up and you might need to like readjust. I never go for it right away, but oftentimes I'll find like if it's a real high dynamic thing, I might need to adjust some of the tonal changes that I made to individual groups of sounds, like a choir or an orchestra. Like, oh, now I've got room to let the cellos breathe and the low end. I can use some of this here, but I can't make it just as loud as this end section. So you start like back stacking your dynamics. And it's so fun when you've done that work. And it is a little funny to work on a mix backwards, but you just do that in the beginning. And then it's really fun to get to the point where you've made it to the beginning of the song and you can hit play and those dynamics all work. And the ending is or whatever the drama is the biggest moment. You're never backed into this corner where you're like, crap, I can't go any further. So I really work very hard, especially mixing in the box, to really carefully preserve all of that headroom. And even in styles that need to sound aggressive and smashed, I always start full headroom and turning up my monitors as much as I need to keep me out of the red and really hear everything and preserve those dynamics. And then once I have a balance and dynamics that I love unprocessed or unsmashed, then it's just kind of a fun game of like, okay, now I got something to work with and I can start smashing this into stuff, for some harmonic things. But yeah, if I don't get that right and work out those drama moments ahead of time for the maximum full bandwidth capacity that they ought to be, then I find myself backing into corners they're much harder to sort out.
For sure. Yeah. I think that all of that makes a lot of sense. It's like, yeah, typically those drama moments are going to be the parts that have the most instrumentation and there's like all this chaos and stuff like that. And so like you said, it's going to be the most challenging part to get everything sounding clear. So if you can tackle that first and get the clarity, then throughout the rest of the song, it should just fall into place.
Yeah, it does.
Do you find that so you'll find like your drama section, you'd mentioned automation as far as like EQ or volume. Do you frequently find yourself like pulling like those verses, let's just say the chorus is the drama section. Will you end up like pulling the verses down in volume so that like there is more of that juxtaposition between the verse and the chorus? Or do you find that sometimes like, or are you like more of like we'll turn the chorus up eventually? Like, I find that like often, like some people push the choruses louder, some people would push the verses lower. I mean, it's all the same thing at the end of the day. Really.
It's all the same thing. Yeah. And song by song, I would say, to answer your question differently, because it's 6 of one, half dozen the other, and we all want that loud chorus. And if it takes a soft, a quieter verse to make that feel that way, you could go about it either way. But what I will say is doing those kinds of global moves on, say, a master fader would definitely be a last kind of finishing move. So while I might want those dynamics and that drama to really explode, the first place I'll look to do that is at the source, whether that's individual instrument tracks or groups. I'm always mixing into like stem-ish submasters, mostly because it lays out and I nicely on about 16 faders, and I can use 2 hands and basically mix the whole thing, most on even large ensembles on that. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, where I always have a layer of VCAs that I can spill into each of those submaster individual tracks. But I'm always trying to preserve that drama and mix those soft verse, loud chorus moments in the individual tracks or in more likely in the submasters.
Gotcha.
And so then it's kind of baked into the mix as opposed to doing that move globally on a master fader. But I will do that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. I definitely love when the song asks for it, when it's the right move to do what we call the slippery fader on those choruses if needed. You know, that's a great trick, and it often works best post-processing. So if I need to do that, if I still need more power out of a chorus, imagine this, like all these submasters are being mixed into a stereo master, whether it's hardware or software. If you are trying to achieve a louder, dramatic chorus by pushing the faders that are going into that master fader, it's just going to eat up that compressor or anything dynamic you have on that master fader. So it doesn't quite have the same result. So when I do those types of moves, I usually have all the dynamics and saturation, if applicable, and harmonic stuff right where I want it. And I don't want more saturation and harmonics and crud on these choruses. I just want them to pop louder. So ultimately what I'll end up doing in those cases is automating like the compressor output or the limiter output on the master fader, because that'll truly feed the mix print hotter on those choruses. And and so oftentimes, because if you're like me, like you're and that is a last resort, this sort of what we call slippery fader, you've already used up all your dynamics, so you can't push the chorus harder. But so you do, like, at least in my workflow, to do that type of global move would be making the verse quieter. And oftentimes it's like, you know, I like the song to start nice and loud and proud usually. And so there's in all of mixing, you know, there's one of the other tips is like a balance is not a mix, you know. Everything moves, you know, and it's all perception, whether you're aware of what's going on as a listener or not. The mix part, everything starts as a balance. Like that's the way, at least for me, that's the way I have to start, is getting a static balance that feels good. And then you mix to amplify things or disguise things or just basically call the listener's attention to something new. And so even when I'm, you know, doing these global moves to increase chorus volume or whatever, a perfect example would be like, I might start the song at 0 dB, let's call it, like right where I had it on the main thing. And as the verse goes along over time, you know, it's going to subliminally drop, let's call it 2 dB over the course of 45 seconds or something like that. And that all works out well because the end of the pre-chorus kind of dies out. And then right where the chorus goes, the output of that limiter is going to jump 2 dB and like blow your face off. And then, but we have to set that trick up again, you know? So I'll probably let the chorus ring out and go back down a little bit and then down further throughout the chorus, like so. Verse rather. So subtly over time, things are sort of resetting so we can like come back with another, you know,
love it. Yeah.
Quick smack in the face, you know, so you don't really feel it. I always think, I don't know if I mentioned it in the mixed power tips, but the song that from my own experience, growing up where like I felt that feeling that I think about when I think about this sort of, you know, the slippery fader vibe is, the Green Day song on Dookie. And now I can't think of the name. My life, my name, and fucking, damn, I can't think of the name. I can hear it in my head. Anyway, oh yeah, the verse is like,
Longview.
Like Longview. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh man, those I have chills just thinking about it. Those choruses hit and it's just like, you're like the Maxell tape guy in the chair, It's so cool, I did that trick for sure on a really awesome album. Let me see if I can find this and send it to you. By the Pom Poms. The first song reminded me of that Longview vibe. It doesn't really sound like it, but I really wanted to do that trick for the choruses. And I remember Stephen Markison was mastering it, and he's like, "Man, I see your 3dB chorus boosts there. Like it's fun or whatever." Yeah, that's a really fun retro-y album that my buddy Billy Moeller did.
Sometimes it's just like a very powerful move, just to like really lean into the automation, right?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, super fun.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. If people want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that and to follow the work that you're doing and maybe even hire you?
Yeah, awesome. My website, dananielsen.com, Nielsen. Because my name, often gets misspelled, and I think if you misspell it, you'll find me anyway. But I have some other sites that are easier to speak on the radio or on the podcast or whatever. One of them for the mix power tips is called studiopowertips.com. Yeah, if you go to my site, or if you get the power tips, we'll be connected. I'm on Instagram at D'Onofrio. It looks like Dana Frio. Dana, yeah. I'm on all the TikToks and the Facebooks, and my Chicago's coming out. Yeah, but my site is a probably first stop to find me. I've got form contact stuff on there, and place to upload your songs if you want to work on something together. And you can find my course on there. I've got a sample lesson for that thing on there. So awesome. Yeah, that's a good place to start.
I'll definitely have the links in the show notes as well, so people have.
Oh, fun! Yeah. Thanks, man.
Awesome, man. Well, Dana, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it, and definitely lots of cool stories that you shared here, and I think people are going to learn a lot from this one.
I hope so, man. It's my pleasure, Mike, and it flew by for me at least. I'm like, wait, we're done. I love talking about this stuff, and you're a delight to chat with, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Right on, man. Thank you again. So that was my interview with Dana Nielsen, and I really enjoyed that. I loved learning about his experience with working with Rick Rubin and how they set up their sessions to run really efficiently with that. I also really enjoyed getting into his vocal editing process and the tools he likes to use. I also thought it was cool, too, to learn about how he likes to deal with bleed when it comes to editing vocals. And I thought that example of recording a guitar and vocal at the same time was a great example to talk about as far as, how do you make something like an isolated vocal track or isolated instrumental track. So I love his creativity on how he tried to troubleshoot through that process and get those clean tracks for that sync deal that he was talking about. So it really goes to show the level of experience and expertise that a pro engineer puts into their job. So yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with Dana and thought he shared a lot of awesome information and definitely lots of great stuff that is actionable for you whenever you're working on your next track. So whether it comes down to making sure that your sessions run smoothly when you're recording an artist or some of the vocal stuff that he was talking about, I think there's a lot of great actionable stuff here in this episode to take and to implement. And I'm sure if you follow his advice here, you're going to get much better results. So definitely try that out. Now, if you want additional support when it comes to your sessions and making sure that your songs sound the absolute best that they can, then I want to take a minute to tell you about my program, Amplitude. Inside of this program, you get one-on-one personalized mentorship and support throughout the entire process. I help you throughout the recording, editing, and mixing stages. And when you're done with your mixes, you can literally send me tracks and get feedback on what is needed to help make sure that you get the sound that's in your head to come out of your speakers. So whether that includes, needing some additional EQ or compression or volume or whatever the song needs, I will personally work with you to make sure that you get the results that you're looking for. And I know how helpful this is because for so many people, they're just working on their own, second guessing themselves, wondering if their tracks even sound good enough. And I don't want you to abandon your songs because you're just stuck, With this program, you're going to get the answers you need to push forward and to feel proud of the music that you're making and ultimately release it and spread the word and share your talents. And that's what this is all about, right? So if you're interested in learning more about Amplitude, make sure to visit masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you'll get all the details. And there's even a spot to set up a call with me. I'd love to talk a little bit more about your processes, and I'd love to talk about your goals and make sure that you're a perfect fit for this program because I only work with people inside who I truly believe I can help. So if you're interested, again, make sure to visit masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And I'd love to hop on a call with you and learn more about how I can help. All right, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the very end. Can't wait to chat with you in the next one, and we'll talk soon. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit masteryourmix.com.